systems where we have had an emergency or we've replaced them over the last number of years, and we've commissioned those to make sure they're built properly.
Okay, so as a board, an expectation that there'd be a building commissioning would be an appropriate expectation?
Yes, it would, and you have to understand that there's different levels of building commissioning. You can commission the whole building and verify doors and windows, or you can just work on your main systems of your building.
Right, and so what should we expect?
At a minimum, the mechanical systems, at a minimum.
I couldn't hear.
MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing.
Thank you, because it's those of us who aren't comfortable with acronyms. Or those viewing at home who aren't comfortable with acronyms. All right, thank you. Do we have any other questions, Ms.
Can I just,
Tassan?
one follow-up to that, because that was on my list as well, and I felt like I was asking too many questions, so I stopped.
So you passed the witness?
Ask the witness, but I'm gonna take you back for a second. So is that, you said that that's something we should take a strong look at. I wrote down that quote. So is that something that's gonna be, that you guys will put into policy, or is that, into procedures, or is that something we as a board need to put into policy?
I think we included on the, I think we included in our recommendation, or I think we bring it forward
Okay.
and put it in a procedure.
Okay, so that's something we should expect to see from you guys. Okay, thank you.
And Mrs. Tassan, I'll just add, that was a recommendation that was made to the board by the administration in 2011 for Bowie Middle School, because a lot of HVAC issues were occurring at that time. So that's not a board policy, but it was put forth by the administration. The board accepted it. Bowie was commissioned, and I believe subsequent. Now, since these buildings are going to be LEED certified, excuse me, there's a prerequisite that they be commissioned. So I think it's in the best interest of Fort Bend ISD that they be commissioned and made to operate the way they're designed before they're turned over to the district to operate and maintain.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rice, and thank you, Mr. Cleaver and Mr. Cooper, for your presentation. It's very informative, and you've probably sparked a million questions from us now. We're just dangerous enough because we know just enough to make us dangerous. I'd like to suggest to the board we take a 5-minute recess and come back at 6:45 to resume our meeting. Are you talking about the investment report or not?
We don't have to. It's more of a, if you have questions, he's happy to answer them.
Okay. All right, we're on.
It's fulfilling the legal requirement.
I know. Okay, so we're on information items now. Item 3. Item A is the investment report that we received with our agendas. Do we have any questions on the investment report? All right, no, thank you. Yes, Mr. Burdine.
That's it. After we reviewed it ourselves, you're asking if we had any questions over it.
That
Nope.
is correct, and
So there's no presentation.
there is no
Okay,
presentation.
that's fine. I was just-
We get it we get it quarterly, I believe,
Right.
and so it comes every quarter. So, and it's basically in the same format. But if you have questions, jump
Yeah.
right in.
Just, these are quick questions, but something I do every day. I'm an investment advisor, and so I try to relate this a little bit to what I do and how this is done. But when we choose a certain investment plan or method, who decides on who buys and sells the securities, or is it grouped together as a I don't know how. How does that process work? Who's making the decisions on buying and selling securities?
We make the decisions in-house. We have Kelly Schlacks is working on that, as well as Suzanne Owen. Okay, they're doing the day-to-day work. We get solicitations from brokers all the time, wanting us to buy the securities or whatever else. But we take a look at that with regard to our plan and our cash flows, and then we make the decisions.
So traditionally, when you buy bonds, are you buying, are they sitting in are you buying them in the open market, or are they sitting on a shelf somewhere? Or it just depends on how you're being solicited, or? who's
Well, I don't
solicited?
think, I mean, we're not buying bonds per se. I mean, we're buying agencies.
Okay.
Okay, and we have monies in, very, very small amount of cash. Then you got money market funds. You have the various pools. Okay, want to try to stay diversified in the pools, but then agency securities are the ones where there is a little bit more analysis, and that's usually what we're working on. We don't invest in any bonds per se.
Going forward here, just assuming that, of course, we don't have a crystal ball, but in the case that we do have a turnaround in the market, do we have cash available or on hand to make some purchases in the future if that's the case, or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but the thing that the market would have to turn around significantly for us to not, again, our strategy is to try to maximize what's available to us with regard to the reimbursement resolution. Because what we will gain by putting off issuing debt, okay, by borrowing from ourselves, the returns on borrowing from ourselves is much greater than anything we can really get in the Public Fund Investment Act.
Okay.
Okay, and so because we are in this capital program and capital mode, and we have, we've broken ground on elementary 46 and 47 is going to be coming, we do want to do that. And so we're going to try to actually shorten our maturity so that we can make sure we can be borrowing as much as we can from ourselves before we have to go to the market to issue debt. And so that's a much better sound, I mean, from an economic perspective. We're going to keep our eye on it. Now, I mean, if things really turn, that much when we're in a situation of positive arbitrage, well, then that's be very different. But a lot will happen between now and then, and we'll probably have another discussion.
So, and then one last question. I mean, just the philosophy that you have, are you managing to risk? Are you managing to return?
Well, I mean, we're very constricted in terms of what we can do from a risk perspective. Okay, I mean, it's outlined, what we can invest in. Okay, but liquidity and safety, I mean, is definitely what we're more concerned about right now. But I mean, we try to get as much return as possible.
Right.
But we definitely have a lot of limitations.
And I know there's a correlation there, but I mean, in a general sense, and in my business, we try to, at least my philosophy is to manage to risk. And if you manage to risk, then you'll get good returns, of course. But if you're just chasing a return, oftentimes you will be on the wrong side of that. So I was just trying to just pick your brain a little bit about that. And I appreciate the report and
Okay.
good detail.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. George?
Yeah, actually, following up on Jason's, who decide, I mean, the asset allocation in the sense, how many % do you buy from where? And, I mean, you understand what
Decide
I'm...
internally. We decide internally. I mean, the policy outlines our limitations in terms of, we can only have, no more than 60% of state pools or money market or in agencies. I mean, so there are some broad guidelines in that regard. And so, we make decisions, actively to stay underneath those thresholds. But diversity is certainly very important.
Right.
It's a key part of any portfolio. And so we try to maintain diversity.
And I see from this, the report from last year, I see that the return is around 2.7%, if I'm not mistaken. I'm talking about, I hope we are discussing that area, right?
Well, I mean, we're talking about our investment returns, but I mean, our total returns on the portfolio, I mean, isn't 2.7%. I mean, the total amount is 0.177%. I mean, if it was 2.7%, we'd be heroes.
Okay.
But yeah, it's 0.177. I mean, which is higher than the benchmarks. It's not a lot. It's higher than the benchmarks. But again, that's why when you're talking about returns of that low, that's why putting off debt as long as possible is going to be really our best return.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions on that? All right, Dr. Dupree, are you like to introduce our next item?
Yes, ma'am. We've got another report. Our second report this evening has to do with a small business initiative. I'll just get started by saying this is a topic that's been on the radar of the district for quite a long time. Even when I worked here as CFO, it was something we dealt with. But seriously, as soon as the day I was hired, had my first meetings with some of the members of the community, this came on my radar. So, and over the last year and a half, community consistently asks me about, are we going to do anything that kind of recognizes the need to provide business to small businesses and local businesses in Fort Bend ISD and Fort Bend County. And so we've gone down a number of exploration trails with this. Finally, it led us right back home to our own attorney, Mickey Morris, who's done extensive work in this area. So we've asked her to kind of lead. I think probably Steve and Michelle might throw in a couple of remarks, but I really appreciate their leadership because they've been working closely to really develop a plan that meets the needs of Fort Bend and our unique community and our unique needs. So I'll turn it over to Michelle and Steve, and then I'll get it to Mickey.
Okay. As Dr. Dupree stated, we have received some inquiry from local businesses. We've started to work on an initiative for small businesses. We had one in the past. As some of you may remember, we did a vendor expo. It was very widely received, so it allowed us to create a great database for vendors who are interested in doing business with us. Currently, we have 5,500 vendors that receive emails regarding any procurement or solicitation that releases on behalf of the district. It's a lovely feature. We're able to communicate if we have changes, if things come up, we're able to email them directly through that system. And while we appreciate that system, we want the program to grow. And we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the community and making sure that we've addressed the concerns that have been brought to us. So the purchasing department, along with Mickey Morris, with Rogers, Morris, and Grover, have begun a preliminary work on such an initiative, and we'd like to review that with you tonight and request any feedback that you might have for us this evening. So I will turn it over to Mickey. You need to get your mic.
Thank you, and thank you all for allowing me to be here tonight. I will tell you honestly that this is probably the third Fort Bend superintendent that I have worked with in exploring lawful options for implementing some type of small business or disadvantaged business program. It's a topic that I personally have invested a great deal of time researching and studying since before I was even licensed to practice law. And just as an aside, I'm going to embarrass your board counsel by saying it's how we met. When I was a law student, I was on the American Bar Association National Varsity Moot Court team, and the year I was on the team for my law school, the topic was affirmative action, and my coach was a man named Rick Morris. And at that time, it was, and we won first place. Can I say that? But even back then, in the context of contracting and in college admissions, this has been a hot topic for a very long time, and there's a lot of law surrounding these types of programs. So if you're wondering why I'm the person talking about this, it's because when a governing body decides to embark upon a program like this, the goals are very laudable and the programs can be very important, but there are also constitutional limitations on what you can and cannot do. And I think it's going to be most beneficial and fruitful for the district to understand what the legal framework is around these types of programs so that when you receive inquiries from the community and you look at developing the program that will work best for your district, you understand what those limitations are. Not all governmental entities are alike, and not all programs are subject to the same rules. And I think generally when people hear small business, the general public tends to use the term small business interchangeably with terms such as hub and underutilized business and disadvantaged business and minority women-owned business. They're not the same. They have different legal definitions, and those programs have different requirements. So the terminology matters. And so I want to kind of walk you through some of those distinctions this evening. Your small business initiative is going to have a couple of components, and procedurally. There's going to be program development, and that'll be an interactive process with the administration and the board. Program implementation, once there's an agreed upon program and there's some understanding of what those program features will be, it'll be a matter of working with multiple departments within the district, such as construction, communications to get that program in place and make sure that it's working properly. And community outreach is a huge part of any successful small business program. It works as well as the outreach, because if the businesses don't understand what the opportunities are, and the prime contractors that you work with don't understand who the small businesses are, then you're not going to see the results. No matter what goal you set, you're not going to see the results you want without a strong community outreach program. Okay, some of the terms I mentioned: HUB, MWBE, small business. HUB stands for historically underutilized business. Disadvantaged business is another term that you may see on certain programs. The City of Houston has a disadvantaged business program as well. What school districts can and cannot do when awarding contracts, and I'm going to kind of give a little constitutional lesson here. In 1989, the Supreme Court decided the Crowson Case, and this was a case that involved the city of Richmond adopting a policy that required a certain percentage of all construction subcontracts to be set aside for minority businesses. The city was sued by a white contractor who claimed reverse race discrimination. And the challenge was, what is the ability of a city to implement a program like that and give preferences when their concern is to redress the present effects of past societal race discrimination. And the court took a long, hard look at these programs, and this was kind of the first piece of the framework that we have in looking at these programs. And what the court held is that states and political subdivisions, including cities, counties, school districts, and other governing bodies, may never give racial preferences in the awarding of contracts if the intent or purpose is to remedy past societal or historical discrimination in general. What the court did say is that if you as a governing body have engaged in discrimination in the awarding of your contracts, then you may implement and take affirmative action to remedy the present effects of past discrimination by you, your governing body itself. So this led to the emergence of what we know are disparity studies. And if you've ever looked at a disparity study, they're very long. They're very expensive, and there are companies around the country that have, since Crowson and the cases that followed, have made a business of looking at your past contracting practices. And I mean years and years and years of past contracting practices to determine whether your particular governing body has engaged in race discrimination against what types of groups and to what extent. And so what came out of Crowson is that you cannot adopt a race-conscious classification. And that, in layman's terms, that means giving extra points to minority or women or disadvantaged businesses without a showing that the school board itself engaged in the past racial discrimination that it seeks to remedy. And so the disparity study will look at your practices to determine if you have done that, to what extent and to what groups. Discrimination against one type of a group of minority vendors, it may not include all racial groups, and it may include women but not minorities, or vice versa. So when you typically hear of a governmental entity that has a HUB program or an MWBE program or a disadvantaged business program, chances are, if they've done it correctly, and most of the ones that you're most familiar with here, state of Texas, in its state agencies, TxDOT, City of Houston, they all have conducted disparity studies. And if you look on the comptroller's website, the Susan Combs website, she has a very helpful article in guiding local governmental entities how to go about adopting HUB programs. But one thing that is made very clear is that you cannot embark upon these programs without first conducting a disparity study. Without a disparity study, some of the practices that may seem like a great idea can be legally challenged. And what we don't want to happen is to implement a procedure or a process that could result in a claim if you don't have a disparity study to justify it, because in the real world, in the construction world, what that looks like is a company who's not awarded a contract or not given extra points, or who's disadvantaged by one of these practices, seeking an injunction to stop the construction project or to enjoin the performance of the contract that was awarded. And as you can imagine, just in Crowson and other cases like this, those projects were halted, stopped, and they had to be waited for a court decision, and the case had to be completed, and then the project had to be re-advertised and re-procured, and that's something you certainly don't want to happen in the context of a bond program, or any construction project for that matter. But some of the list of prohibited actions without showing constitutional justification is giving preferences and scoring based on race and gender. Now, I've done a lot of trainings for different boards and governmental entities on this topic, and the first thing that comes up is, well, wait a minute, when I look at the list of selection criteria in the statute, it has in there the vendor's ability or the district's ability to comply with requirements for HUB or MWBE programs. That is in there, but what I ask people to do is go back and read it again. It does not say, is the vendor a HUB or an MWBE? What it says is the impact of the district's ability to comply with laws or rules relating to HUB. So if you are a district who has one, you have to consider that. If you are a district using state grant funds or federal grant funds, you have to consider that, because the state of Texas and the federal government, they do have affirmative action programs justified by their disparity studies. But in the absence of a disparity study, that selection criteria is not one that you're going to be able to implement. And even when you are, it's looking at how does the selection of this vendor allow me to comply? It could be how they're subcontracting. It's not whether the vendor itself is a HUB or a minority or women-owned business. Set-asides or quotas, not to be confused with goals. It's great to have goals, and you can look at data to see where you are in those benchmarks, but requiring your vendors to set aside a certain number of dollars for HUBs or minority or women-owned businesses is not permitted without a disparity study. Requiring that a certain number of your prime vendors, also not permitted. Forcing vendors to joint venture or enter into some type of business partnership for a business based on their race or gender is not permitted unless you can justify it with a disparity study. And this is interesting, this came out of a Metro litigation. It was a very scathing opinion written by a local federal judge for the Southern District of Texas. Metro was actually enjoined from seeking race or gender information from any of their vendors. Now, that was because there were a lot of questions as to what Metro was doing with that information. And they said they weren't considering it in the awarding of contracts, but apparently the judge had some concerns and so enjoined Metro from seeking that information from the vendors on the front end at all, and said if you really are trying to achieve goals, you can ask everybody after the project what their race and gender was and see where you shook out, but you're seeking it up front and we don't trust that you're not taking it into account somehow. You can certainly ask your vendors to submit that information. You currently do on your supplier diversity tracking form, but it's optional. You can't make it a condition of competing for a contract that they supply that information, and you couldn't disqualify them for refusing to provide it. The state of Texas, they commissioned their first disparity study in 1994, and they updated it in 2009. And of course, they did find that the state had engaged in past race discrimination, and from that came a chapter in the Texas Government Code, 2161, that is binding on all state agencies. And I often hear other governmental entities reference the HUB program. The HUB program, that is for state agencies and the state of Texas. It does not apply to school districts or junior colleges. And if you think about the purpose of a disparity study, it is very possible that while the state of Texas may have engaged in race discrimination in the past, it doesn't mean that XYZ ISD did. They're a separate governing body. They award their own contracts. So when you get into local control of governments, they don't get to piggyback on the state's disparity study. They have to conduct their own. City of Houston, there has been litigation ongoing, or there had been litigation ongoing for years over the city's program. And they have gone through multiple revisions of their disparity study, and they have been challenged multiple times on their disparity study. Most recently, just in the last couple of years, groups saying, well, wait a minute, those goal percentages and set-asides that you all had in place based on your last disparity study, they don't ring true anymore. You've made up for that past discrimination. You're no longer discriminating against women, and the court ordered them to change their percentages and take out certain preference groups and allow them to keep others. And so it's not enough to just conduct a disparity study to show where you have engaged in discrimination in the past. You have to show that the program you're adopting is what the court calls narrowly tailored to achieve those goals, meaning that the preferences are directed at the right groups of people and for the right percentages. The City of Houston also has a small business program, and it is a race-neutral, gender-neutral certification requirement consistent with the U.S. government Small Business Administration program, so they have both. And it's interesting, it was the Crowson case that actually led to the popularity of small business programs, because I think what people started realizing is that they were talking about small businesses. Now, of course, a lot of the smaller and emerging businesses may tend to be women-owned or minority-owned business, but maybe not. There are a lot of non-minority and male-owned businesses that are also struggling small businesses in your community. And language that came out of Crowson that I've quoted for you here led people to realize that, well, wait a minute, if I'm only targeting small business and I'm looking to promote small businesses, then I need to recognize that those businesses may be minority-owned, they may not be, they may be women-owned, they may not be. And this is the type of business program and contracting program and outreach program that you can engage in without having to do a disparity study, because you're not giving preference to any particular race or gender. You're focusing on business size, which is not a protected class under the U.S. Constitution. So in looking at what Fort Bend could currently do without having conducting or commissioning a disparity study, you could set a small business participation goal and have a minimum requirement that your vendors engage in good faith efforts to engage small business in all of the school district contracts. You also should take action and be aggressive in breaking your projects into smaller contracts where feasible, to create business opportunities for small business prime contractors and subcontractors. I often hear that the one challenge for small businesses is they may not have the bonding capacity to compete for large projects. They may not have the ability to get the insurance that they need to assume the risk on a large project. And so, as Max talked about, one of the things I know he's looking at for the bond program is finding out where you can have job order contracting to address some of the facilities needs that very often get lumped into the scope of a larger project, but can just as easily be take form in smaller contracts that can be awarded, even some under the $50,000 threshold, where you don't have to engage in procurement. You can have a pool of local vendors that you call upon to perform these projects, or at least breaking some of the projects that still have to be procured down into a size that's more manageable for a small business, where they can get the payment and performance bonds and cut their teeth and work their way up to larger capacity projects. Another feature that the administration will be recommending is that prime construction contractors who commit to utilize locally certified small business subcontractors will receive scoring preferences. And I'm going to give you a sample in a minute of what that would look like. You can encourage small business mentoring partnerships, and by small business, again, race and gender neutral small businesses, to allow those local small businesses to work in tandem with a larger business to develop the capacity and the experience to allow them to compete on their own someday. It's most common when I look at different small businesses that other governmental entities have. 25% it's a strong goal. It is achievable in the area of construction. You do have a lot of subcontractors that are able to meet this definition. You have large subcontractors where it's more difficult, but there are so many different subcontractors that come on and off a construction project that this is a very achievable goal. It's certainly not easy. It requires a lot of outreach, but I think it's a good goal for you all to start with in the area of construction. And small business eligible contract would be a construction contract that is valued at $50,000 or more. And keep in mind, it can't be a federally funded sole source or a contract that is not capable of being subcontracted. You have to create those exceptions. You may have a contract that is a $60,000 electrical repair contract, and the vendor itself is going to be the electrician, and they won't be subcontracting out. If you have a federally funded contract, I know you all are looking at doing some Sparks parks. Those parks have to be constructed with community development block grant funds, and that requires you to comply with the federal affirmative action requirements. So there are going to be exceptions based on the types of contracts of what you can and can't do with your own local small business program. And as I said, the actual participation may vary. You have to keep in mind that you will set these goals and you'll track the data and the success, but there are certain projects where you may not have available small businesses to compete or to perform the services, and so it requires some flexibility and monitoring compliance with those goals. One of the features of the program that we're looking at implementing for Fort Bend is requiring that the small businesses be certified by local agencies here, and not just the federal Small Business Administration. The Port of Houston has a small business certification, Metro has a small business certification, and so does the City of Houston. And it's important to require a certification, and right now what you all have done is defined a small business to be based on a number of employees or not be predominant in its field. Well, this will be a more objective definition of small business, and we'll get to that next, but requiring that they actually have that certification means that these agencies have looked at the business, looked at their annual revenues, looked at their ownership, looked at where they're located, their net worth of their owners, and determined that they truly meet the definition of a small business. What is a small business? Well, you start with the federal definition, and it was just updated this past summer by, I guess, a couple $1 million in each category, a few $1 million in each category. For a general contractor, the small business thresholds don't have a number of they don't have an employee number limit, but they do have annual revenue limitations. So for a general contractor in the construction industry, it's $36.5 million a year in annual revenues. And for subcontractors, trade-specific companies like electricians and plumbers and drywall companies, it's $15 million. A significant local business presence. The certifying agencies that we're recommending for you all, City of Houston, Metro, and Port of Houston, all have different requirements in their definition. Metro does not require a local significant presence, but the City of Houston and the Port of Houston do, meaning that the small business has to have an office located in one of these counties. And I believe Austin and San Jacinto County were just added to this list recently for the City of Houston by ordinance. Excuse me. Port of Houston has a net worth limitation of $750,000. for each owner of the business, excluding their home and the value of the business itself. And Metro has a net worth limitation of 1.32 million for each owner that has a 5% or more ownership interest. The City of Houston doesn't have a net worth limitation on their small business certification. But all small businesses, by federal law, are required to be true small business in that they cannot be a pass-through or affiliate of a non-small business. So a very wealthy company cannot create a wholly owned subsidiary and limit those revenues and receive a certification of small business designation. Significant local presence. I've written a number of opinions on this. Is a very common and fair question in procurement, and even districts that are not looking at having a small business program, I'm constantly getting phone calls saying, we want to add to our selection criteria that they are a business within our school district. Can we do that? And I'm always, please don't shoot the messenger, I'm always the bearer of bad news saying, no, this rule has been settled for school districts. And if you want to read the opinion, I've put the site up there for you, but Dallas ISD submitted this question to the Attorney General in 1992, and it's been the interpretation, and it's verified by the way the legislature has set up your procurement statutes, that unless you can demonstrate that the proposer's location bears an apparent objective relationship to best value, quality or value, you cannot make it one of your selection criteria that the business is located within your school district. And just to give you a little background, I know that a lot of municipalities do engage in, there's Hire Houston First, and have more requirements for local presence. Municipalities are given more latitude in promoting the general welfare of its residents. They have economic development powers that school districts do not have. And school districts' missions are more focused on education and not general welfare, and so you see more latitude with cities and their ability to favor local businesses and enhance local tax base. School districts do not yet legislatively have that ability. There have been attempts to create those powers in your procurement statutes, and it has not yet been successful. So you cannot give preferences to a bidder on the basis of on their residence or location where they don't impact the contract price. Now, there may be procurements where they do. For example, if you want a company who's going to come and repair your chillers and your HVAC equipment, in the middle of the night, can you consider how close they are? Absolutely. That is relevant to best value. That is relevant to their ability to perform the services. And if they're charging mileage or trip charge, it may be relevant to the cost. But for your larger construction projects and service contracts, if they're able to give you a competitive price and they're able to perform the job by having a representative relocate or a small local office, then you're not allowed to discriminate against them because they're not local, in the absence of clear statutory authority. So you do find some examples in the law where you can favor local businesses, but there are very few of them, and there's really only one that ever comes into play for school districts. And Chuckle, this actually came into play at a board meeting. We were all out there with our little books looking on a procurement a couple years ago. If you're a school district whose central administrative office is located in a municipality with a population of less than 250,000, you can favor a bidder located within your city, but only under certain circumstances. One, you had to have used a competitive sealed bid method, which is not a method that school districts ever use for anything. You really only see it anymore for water plants and things like that. Or the solicitation was for goods and non-construction services valued at less than $500,000 per year. I'm sorry, and that's not an or, that's an and if the local bidder's price is within 5% of the lowest bidder whose offices are not. So really, it's a tie-break statute. That is the only statute that allows a school district to consider a bidder's residence. And again, it's residence within the municipality, not within the county. So it really is a very limited circumstance. So how do you enforce these programs? A lot of people have, great ideas and great goals, and you want to put something into your programs and your procurement policies. How do you enforce these programs? Well, the first way to do it is you require all of the contractors to submit a small business plan with their proposal. And there's a form that they submit with their CSP proposal that lists out the subcontractors that they're going to bring to the job and the percentage of dollars that they're committing to pay to those subcontractors to show that they've complied with the goal that they've committed to reach. If they're not able to commit to the goal, they must, at a minimum, submit documentation of good faith efforts. Good faith efforts, it's easy to say you're going to make good faith efforts, so I wouldn't give anybody a great deal of scoring preference for making good faith efforts, because that should be the minimum that you require from your vendors to make a good faith effort. Those that are willing to commit to the actual dollars should get the scoring preferences. There is a form that vendors submit with every monthly pay application showing, for this amount that I'm seeking to draw this month, this is the percentage that's going to be paid to this small business, and these are the dollars that's going to be paid to this small business. They can also follow up and document what was actually paid to the small businesses the previous month to make sure that those dollars went where they were supposed to go. And you can consider in future procurements whether any contractor made a commitment and failed to meet it. People ask, can I terminate the contractor? You can always terminate a contractor for convenience. Is it in your best interest to do so? If you find out you're in the middle of a construction project and they're not making it, do you want to stop and get another contractor? So you have to give some thought before you put some kind of death penalty clause in your programs. I really don't recommend it. You may want the discretion to do that, certainly. But the best way to enforce your program is to make sure vendors know that if you made a commitment to us and you didn't follow it, then next time you compete for a project here, that's something that we will get to consider in scoring you in your relationship, your past relationship with the district. And it's also a good idea in your procurement to ask these vendors how successful they've been in meeting the goals and commitments that they've made for other owners who have small business programs or even HUB or MWBE programs. Ask them, have you ever made a commitment and not been, and be prepared to follow up with those references to find out if they were a good partner or prime contractor in following through with those commitments. A sample scoring spread that you would implement into your selection criteria for small business eligible projects could look like this. Good faith efforts, that at a minimum, you should be willing to make good faith efforts, so you don't get any extra points for that. But as your commitment to engage a certain level of small business subcontractors increases, so does your ability to receive extra points in scoring, up to a 5-point spread or whatever the district decides the spread is going to be. I've had some folks ask me, can we make this 10 points? Can we make this 20 points? Can we make it 40 points? Although it's not been litigated in a published decision yet, based on the cases that are out there, based on the Attorney General's opinion for the Dallas case, which not only addressed the vendor's location, but it did address MWBE and HUB issues in scoring. You've got to be very careful to balance best value and qualifications with business participation, and there's a point at